vice presidential candidates. With school starting, many people had questions about our broken education system.
What are the changes you would make to the educational system?
How would you improve the quality of education for all Americans?
We would abolish the Federal Department of Education. When the state of New York ends up sending money to Washington, and by the time it comes back from Washington with all of the caveats associated with how should you conduct education in New York State, really, it's a diminishment of about 6% of those educational resources that could have been in New York's hands to begin with. More money for education is eliminating the Federal Department of Education.
And we need more school choice and more charter schools and more opportunity for those kids and their parents to escape from those school systems, to put pressure on the school systems to shape up or ship out. And after those took effect, 3 years after I left, Massachusetts ranked #1 in reading and math every year since then. So, you know, it was an end to social promotion, where you get to the end of high school, and even if you don't show competency in reading and writing, you get promoted, because otherwise it would be discriminatory not to graduate you from high school. That's not doing the student any favors at all. So I think you need to be hard-headed there. Education is a place where we need conservative, hard-headed approaches.
And choice, leaving it to the states, leaving it to individual schools to compete.
As governor of New Mexico, I was more outspoken than any other governor in the country regarding school choice, that we needed to open up competition to public education.
This freedom creates other problems. On Facebook, Trey Price asks, one of your policy ideas involves devolving the Department of Education, putting education under the control of the local government and parents. But where I went to school, if that were to happen, the most likely result is that some groups would pressure the schools to stop teaching evolution in favor of creationism, and there'd be other attacks on science. So you just let them?
Well, I guess you're back to the lunch counter now. You got a one way one side and one way the other side. Look, federal government exists to enforce the Constitution, the law of the land. And leaving choices to individual states, I think we're going to always come down on the side of that, unless, of course, those end up to be constitutional violations.
On Facebook, Ian Moffat asks, what's your solution to the student debt crisis? I read you'd think student loans should be cut, and as a libertarian and someone who realizes financial aid is the reason for higher tuition, I agree, but is that all you'll support? Any reforms to actually help students like me pay for the hyperinflated cost of college?
Well, one thing I think we need is more online education, distance education, as opposed to the most expensive model, which is the 4-year bricks-and-mortar, ivy-clad institution.
Am I just unrealistic? I keep waiting for a libertarian politician to answer a question like that. What are you going to do to help me with my student debt? And say, nothing. I can't make up your bad mistakes.
We did that on job creation. Well, at least Gary did.
Well, students have been sold a bill of goods. The reason for the high cost of college tuition is guaranteed government student loans. So government has stacked the deck from the very beginning.
Audience, yes, sir.
For students who already have taken out student loans, what would you do to address the ballooning debt without placing the burden on the backs of the taxpayers?
Well, I got to take a dig at John for starters, and that is, you know, looking for the libertarian solutions. Look, we've been dealt a hand here that's unfair by government. So taking that into account, can we not cap those interest rates?
But that costs the taxpayer money.
It does.
But more online education doesn't burden the taxpayers. School choice in charter schools doesn't burden the taxpayers. More jobs available through partnerships with the private sector doesn't burden the taxpayers.
Yes, go ahead.
Governor Weld, you mentioned distance learning as an option for higher ed. Would you also be in favor of distance learning or homeschooling, online education as an option for parents for K through 12 education as well?
Oh, sure. All for homeschooling, all for distance learning online.
But we firmly
believe...
Power to
parents. Power to parents. It doesn't take a village to raise a child. Takes parents.
If you empower 50 states to do this, 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice, those are going to end up being best practices that will get emulated. Of course, there'll be horrible failure, which will be sticking with the status quo, and that'll be avoided.
But, you know, even charter schools have to have freedom to fail.
And when there's freedom to fail, then the good schools thrive and teach more kids.
Right. And people learn things.
Coming up.